Welcome to the All Things Wildfire podcast, where we delve into the latest trends and hot topics in protecting properties against wildfire. So sit back, relax, and join us as we arm you against disaster.
So today's guest I have is someone who has a Master of Science from the Oklahoma State University. For the past 6 years involved in legislation, actuarial science, and catastrophe modeling, all related to the wildland-urban interface. And one of the comments that I read on one of the reports that he had put together for Cal Poly when he was presenting at Cal Poly was this comment here, which I think resonated for me, and I hope it resonates for you. We cannot suppress our way out of property loss, but we can reduce ignition. And he shared that, hey, this is not necessarily the first time that he's heard it. He's just shared it. And I love this statement because when we begin to think about it, it's so very true. And so without further ado, let me introduce Frank Frevault with Woolsey Fire Institute. Frank, thank you for joining us, brother.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Vincent.
Yes. Thank you. And then, Frank, I left a few things out of the intro because you have you've accomplished so much. So can you fill in a little bit more of what you've done and how what you have learned has got you to this position in working with the Woolsey Fire Institute?
Very good. Well, it's a great question. I'll summarize quickly. I started with the fire service back in 1979. I've had the good fortune of being able to work at special districts, city, county, state, and federal organizations, essentially from firefighter to fire chief. And it really wasn't until recently that I realized we, the fire service, and a very closely related industry, the insurance industry, we were assessing wildfire risk in different ways. And it occurred to me, I had a local property owner pass a defensible space inspection, Mammoth Lakes, that's where I was at recently as a fire chief. Passed it on a Monday and had their insurance non-renewed later that same week.
Ooh.
And when they called to ask me, Chief, how can this be? I, the supposed fire professional, couldn't answer the question. So it started me down a path of understanding. We collectively, all of us, I don't think, really realized the incremental changes that were starting to reveal themselves in the WUI.
I love that. That example that you gave right now, Frank, about the homeowner saying, "Hey, Chief, like I've done the things that I was supposed to do, and still here I was dropped or non-renewed from my carrier." I was at a fire chief council meeting a year and a half ago, and those were the comments. And what's interesting, Frank, is that I began to discover this over the past couple of years. Firefighters, they care. And I know this doesn't, of course they care, but they really do. Like they're really, all the firefighters that we employ and that we deal with, they have a heart for service. And when they tell a homeowner, Mrs. Smith, you can do this to help your home against wildfire, and yet they're dropped, what's happening? How insulting is that, right? And so these firefighters are saying, what can we do? What else can I have Mrs. Smith do to help her? Because we feel like we're sending this message, but it's being disconnected over on this side. And now there's this problem. So there's a heart from the firefighters that really want to make an impact. And I hope all the firefighters listening can comment on this, because I've seen it more and more, how there's this level of frustration of that particular example that you gave. So, yeah, thank you for sharing. There's something else you wanted to add?
Well, just, you're spot on, right? Our mission is protection of life and property. We try to give the best information we can. And the truth is, Vincent, we in the fire service too have underestimated and really misunderstood with the best of intentions, the setting that we're in. So essentially what we're doing, some colleagues and I just recently started at Cal Poly with the Woolsey Institute, April of this year. But I brought a lot of work that I was doing with me to join their good work. And the work really is hopefully what we can discuss today is this strategic approach to actually a cycle of mitigation we can sustain over time. And it is going to reduce property losses, absolutely.
Sustain over time, which I think bridges me right into something we were talking about offline before about, now that you're with the Woolsey Institute, there's almost a different definition or a different way of looking at things from the Woolsey, right? And you had shared earlier that how it ties into some of the other like oceanic reports and how that whole ecosystem is different and how we need to treat this. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Well, yeah, it's helpful for us when we find transferable examples, right? And
right.
We're telling a story at the end of the day, Vincent. We're telling a story to property owners, to the fire service, and really to the insurance industry. And so the one that seemed to make sense to me is that we've had oceanographic sciences, study of the oceans, and terrestrial sciences, study of the land, a lot longer than we have had coastal sciences. That's a relatively new arrival. And it just took us a while to realize, man, there's a lot of interesting, complex things that happen at coastlines that you can't explain through typical oceanographic terrestrial sciences. I mean, politically, economically, socially, environmentally, meteorologically, right? It's just a unique space. And once we understood that, we could explain what goes on, these coastal systems a lot better. And I just think we're finally getting the evolutionary step of realizing the WUI is just another version of an interface. In this case, it's really landscape dominated by vegetation, in and adjacent to urban settings. The way I would define that, we can get into it if we have the time, but we're looking at it as a concentration of 100 or more structures in and around a landscape that will carry vegetation fire, where those structure separation distances average about 100 feet or less apart. Because what we're all responding to here, you've been at this a long time, so have I. What we're responding to here is the fairly recent development of catastrophic levels of loss to life and property.
Right.
We've had fires, we've had structures get lost in fires for as long as I've been here, and certainly before that. But what's polarizing us are these conflagrations.
Yes. And I'll just add, Frank, you can continue to call me Vincent as much as you want, but my name's OP. And I'm just messing with you. You said Vincent twice, and I'm like, let me just clarify really quick. Don't even sweat it.
I was chasing some email traffic. I apologize.
Of course. Yeah. So, no, I love that. I think to really look at the WUI now with a different perspective, and here's how I see it. Going back to the comment about how we cannot suppress our way out of a property loss, but we can reduce ignitions. So suppression is really a reaction. And I feel that the clients and the homes inside the wildland-urban interface, homes in the WUI, the people love to be in those areas because there's a level of privacy, there's a level of nature, there's all these things that people really enjoy about it, but it doesn't come without significant risk, especially in the last 10 years. And I think with wildfire alone, in the past 5 years, there's been this escalation of we've got to pay attention to what's happening. And I feel like it's almost a reaction, almost like a suppression reaction. It's a reaction. What are we going to do? How are we going to fight? And I hope, and listening to you, my thought is, I hope that there isn't just this reaction of we have to do something for the time being temporarily, but I hope there's this long-lasting answer or long-lasting discoveries and continued development and continued research to help these communities really coexist in these areas. Even though a lot of people are saying, well, let's not build in those areas. I get it. But there are so many homes already in those areas that taking this holistic approach of how are we going to coexist, just like the example you gave with the ocean, how are those homes coexisting with oceanfront properties? It's a different ideal, and the same thing with the WUI. So I'm excited about that kind of development. Can you elaborate a little more on what it is that the Woolsey Institute is doing for homeowners and for communities, and the messaging that's going out to people to help them with this wildland-urban interface issue that they're having?
Well, it's a great question. OP. Got it. I got it.
I got you, Frank. Yeah, you got it.
Yes, you did. Guilty as charged. Well, one of the reasons I reached out to you is I had heard, as I was listening to some of the podcasts, some of the colleagues I'm working with you've had on the show, right? Dr. Ed Cope, former Chief Hawks, and some other individuals. So the Woolsey Institute does not directly go out. I mean, we may have some, we have pilot projects and different things we'll do in different communities that we may help out with, but we really work to be the trusted academic partner in helping the other colleagues in this space. So IBHS, as you know, provides, really structure, scale testing, really full assembly testing. I love what they're doing there. Been following that work and participating from time to time. We also need to work with, and it's not just California, but I work in about 5 states on this issue of alignment between State Fire Marshal's office, the State Insurance Commissioner, the State Insurance Trades, as they choose to organize, and the State Fire Chiefs Association, OP. And that's really important because most of this issue usually involves a local fire agency. We have to have the state agencies provide the uniformity and the top-down guidance.
Right.
But we have to solve this in the last mile. That's you and me working with our homeowners. They're all busy, right? They're trying to get kids to school and working 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 jobs.
Right. And
so we've got to make sure that we tell the story such that they understand it's really worth the time. And we all those 4 stakeholders I just mentioned, we all have to be telling them the same thing, so they don't get the disconnect that got me into this in the first place, right? Hey, how could I pass the defensible space inspection? And they get non-renewed. And it's complicated, but we're getting there. There is a way forward. I mean, and it's pretty simple. Within a half to a quarter mile of concentrations of 100 structures or more, where the average separation distances are 100 feet or less, we're going to disrupt 3 fire pathways. One is vegetation to vegetation. The second is vegetation to structure. And the third is structure to structure. And that's really it in a nutshell. That's the whole strategy. There's a lot wrapped into that, but the homeowners need to understand all phases of that. And as far as wildfire goes, the truth is, even if I was wildly successful beyond all imagination with the Woolsey Institute, that's really just to set an enabling condition for something much more important. We have accumulated an unsustainable level of fuel in the West with the best of intentions. These aren't bad management policies. These are management policies at the time in history we asked our agencies to carry out. But we had an unintended consequence. So we have an unsustainable level of fuel. Climate change has linked together the number of days and consecutive days we'll have weather conditions favorable for large fire loss. We do that. I use the Haynes Index as a good measure for that. Your viewers are probably familiar with that, but I think it's something like 90% of all acres burn on Haines 5 and 6 days out of a range from 1 to 6. When you project climate change into the future, those days, number of days there'll be more of them annually, and there'll be more that are concurrent, which is a big deal. And the third thing is development. We have a housing crisis. This isn't just a rich people problem. This is an everybody problem.
Yeah.
A lot of times development in the WUI will help take that off. So we actually have to get beneficial fire back on the landscape, more frequent lower level fire back on the landscape, or we could start to lose things that are much more important. Aquifers, the ability to keep the air recycling through. If we lose that, we lose everything. But we'll never have tolerance for those policies that'll save us in the long run if we can't show that we can consistently and intelligently protect our communities from wildfire.
Wow. So I want to touch on a couple of things. Right now, you just said, we have to be able to show that we can consistently protect our communities. And, with actuarial science and your background, because when I talk to actuaries, they're like, we don't have enough data. We don't have enough data. And I'm like, I want to shake them, right? But the reality is, based on what you just said, I wonder if there was a community, and maybe there are some now, because there's such a heightened awareness now. So maybe there are some communities that have implemented, for example, IBHS standards for wildfire prepared home. If there is a community like that, I wonder, and they're in the WUI, I wonder if a wildfire were to come through and these homes were to survive, like that would be such a testament to the work. I would be so excited. It's frightening, right? But so excited to say, holy smokes, hey, Mr. Actuaries, Mrs. Actuaries, come over here, because this is the data that we need. What do you see from a science perspective that is needed in order to prove to the common person and later to the insurance carriers that this type of work really does make a significant difference in reducing risk?
So it's a great question. I'd say my three strongest cohorts in this space, and there's a bunch of people we're working with. There's so many people that are contributing. OP, it's really heartening. These are a bunch of smart people. The three that I work with the most closely on this strategic approach, Chief Dave Winterker out of Moraga Rinda, and an actuary, Milliman actuary, Nancy Watkins, who's brilliant. And what we did is we said, we have to share this idea that we have with all of the players in this space. And so we convened a meeting at the Hoover Institute at Stanford. It's come up on a year now. We essentially explained a cycle that says we want the very best fire science driving the very best modeling, which will drive the best valuation of risk mitigations. That will set conditions for the data that we need to collect. Once we have the data, we can actually use that in emergency operations side as well. But when we do post-fire reconstruction, to your point, what you just said, we'll be able to determine mitigation efficacy and then redefine the best science. And that is essentially the cycle. Now, when we laid that out, and these were it's almost like the old get smart cone of silence room, right? We asked some people to come and have courageous but secure conversations. So these were competitors, these were regulators, these were practitioners, academics. They looked at that and they said, we can buy into that. That's an ideal state. That makes good sense to us. And we can't do it for these reasons. They didn't have a core set of mitigations to align behind, and they had no historical loss data to trust it enough to put it into some of their systems. So we identified 5 enabling tasks that had to happen to close that arc. And they are
really quick. Are those the Hoover Five?
Yes, those are the Hoover
Okay,
Five.
cool. Because
you're on board.
As I was doing my research, I'm like, well, I want to tap into this Hoover Five, right? So I have that on my notes. I love that. And for some of the listeners that don't understand your comment of the Get Smart room, because I think there's some listeners here.
Sorry, I'm old.
No, I get it. There's some listeners here that are like, what does that even mean? You gotta go watch Get Smart. What was the show? What was the title of the show? Was it Get Smart?
I think it was Get Smart. And
yeah.
It was he and the chief would have this cone of silence. Nobody can hear him talk. Safe place to have a courageous conversation.
Absolutely. And when you think back then, it was really interesting because he had a phone on his watch, and we're like, oh my God, that is the future, and here we are in it. Okay, yeah. So back to our comments. Let's talk about the Hoover Five. Can you unpack that in general terms?
So the first one is we have to get a core set of mitigations that matter. And this really is where the work from IBHS, I had Roy Wright and some of his folks sit in. We were at a meeting back in 2020. It was right before they were rolling those out. I've had the good fortune of working with he and his staff on those.
Right.
So the first one is a core set of mitigations. I believe the IBHS Wildfire Prepared Home is the best packaging of science that we have now as a starting point. We're going to know more under this strategic cycle I told you. We're going to know more over time. I think IBHS has given us the perfect starting point at parcel level.
Love it.
So I'm working in 5 states through a Moore Foundation grant that's executed through the Western Fire Chiefs Association. And it's getting those 4 stakeholders I talked to you earlier about, to get them to align around a core set of mitigations. So if we can hit critical mass in California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, and Colorado, we believe that will be a tipping point for policy and for the market. And so we're pursuing getting those IBHS Wildfire Prepared Home guidelines as the core set of mitigations in each of those states to be recognized. So that's the first one. The second one is we don't currently have a structured structure fire spread model. Doesn't exist. The people who are generating them, which we appreciate having something, are typically using an existing fuel type, a heavy timber / blowdown fuel type, as a surrogate for structures. But you can't mitigate a slash pile. You can't put a vent on it. You can't, So I'm actually working with Dr. Hussam Muhammad out of Colorado State University. He's using an approach called graph theory. I think it's brilliant. I think it's the way we're going to model this in the future. So we're able to get him a multi-year grant to get that thing rolling.
And that's graph theory?
Graph theory, yeah. It may sound bizarre, but the fact is you and I and your listeners are relying on graph theory probably 20 times a day, and we don't even know it.
Wow.
So this isn't unicorn science, right? This is something that's established and in use. Okay. The third one is insurers don't have a way to actually measure the capability of a community's emergency response to disrupt that transition from vegetation to structure and structure to structure.
Right.
So we're in beta testing right now for an instrument that we're doing, again, through the Western Fire Chiefs Association, that will measure the community and mutual aid responses in those 3 spaces we talked about, right?
Okay. Vegetation
with 1.5 to 1/4 mile, vegetation structure. The fourth one is a WUI data commons. As you said, the actuaries and the people say, wait, we don't have the data we need.
Yeah.
Well, there's a reason for that. There's actually 2 reasons, and they're very reasonable. The regulatory industry over insurance and the industry itself don't like to share data. One comes from an antitrust standpoint, which makes sense.
Yeah.
The other is a competitive standpoint. Nobody wants to share data. But here's the error in that. When you write policies that are physically separated, you don't put them all in the same space out of saturation of risk. That's bad business.
Right.
So you disperse the policies physically. And you could look at each parcel and say, wow, that one's good, that one's good, that one's good, that one's good. I got 4 parcels here, they're perfectly mitigated, I'm good. But you and I know that fire doesn't transfer that way. It transfers structure to structure.
And so the fire doesn't respect or identify property line. Right? Yeah. Right.
So essentially I made a statement a while back to somebody, and they said, wow, that's right. Where you've got structure separation distances less than 100 feet in the defined area I gave you for WUI. When you have WUI conditions, you can't possibly know your aggregate risk in your book of business without knowing your adjacent risk by property. Yeah. So we have to create a WUI data commons. Nancy Watkins with Milliman is working in this space. And again, she's just brilliant. Always feel smart just sitting next to her.
I love it.
So we have to create this system where people that don't normally share data feel good about putting data into a system so that they can all extract back out of it in a way that doesn't create antitrust problems, and it doesn't violate their intellectual property and their market utility. There's a way to do that. And then everybody benefits because we have better situational awareness that we don't have now. It's like we're colorblind to this particular kind of conflagration risk. So that's the 4th one. And then the last one is understanding the social complexity of having people implement these mitigation actions and maintaining them. As you said earlier, we love to go live in these places that are beautiful and to be close to them. And really what it is we don't implement these things because we don't really understand the risk. And a fire coming through is a potential thing. Going outside and chopping down your favorite adjacent bush is a real thing.
Yes.
But I'll go back to the coastal sciences thing for a minute. Every so many years we get a really serious storm on the coastline, and you zoom in and somebody from the helicopter is watching the hillside slowly fall away from the structure. And everybody sees exactly what's going to happen.
Right.
This is not a mystery. Yeah. And there are things that you can do to mitigate some of that. But at the end of the day, there are some risks. There are some places that you coexist really at your own risk. Mother Nature usually doesn't lose those battles. So we think that there's a way to be intelligent about knowing how to coexist and actually skip those few really, really untenable places. I mean, here's a new thought. We believe that a properly mitigated master planned community can in and of itself be a disruption to a fire pathway. But you have to build it right and you have to maintain it. And it's usually the maintenance that gets us in trouble, right? Anything coming out of the ground is new, but what does it look like in 40 years? Been having some interesting discussions with the building association and trades, getting them to understand, hey, partner with us. We know you can build these things coming out of the ground. Right, they've gone to great effort. But understand, it's the holding costs 4 and 5 and 6 decades later. That's when we lose these things. So help us figure out ways to engineer in from the beginning a way to drop those holding costs for survivability.
So much there, Frank. I love it. Wow. And I think, when you talk about disruption of pathway, it's another word would be a fire break. Would you say that or no?
Nope.
Okay. Because when you're describing the disturbance of the pathway, and you said, hey, we can build this community, and that could be a disturbance. The first thing I thought about is that's the fire break from the fires coming in my terminology, but I'll let you kind of expand on what you mean by that.
Well, we may both be correct.
Okay.
It's true that a properly planned and built anything that won't carry fire, it could be an airplane hangar, it could be a football field, it could be a parking lot, it could be a planned development. It doesn't matter what disrupts the fire pathway.
Right.
But here's the thing: is the fire break. You tend to think of linear, right? That fire break is a line. And when we look at, we're trained to do this because when we see maps or models generating fire spread, it always shows a line that you could trace,
Right.
which is really how we used to do it back in the day. You'd come off your ship, you'd go into where they had all maps, and you'd take out your topo map and you would, scribble it in.
Yeah.
Now we do it with breadcrumbs and GPS and stuff, but that's not how fire spreads unless it's a super, super uniform fuel like grass or something.
Got it.
You have edgeways. And what's really important in the most probable fire pathways, think about flooding. When you're going to do flood mitigation, you don't put a 6-foot moat around an entire building or a 6-foot, retention dam around an entire community.
Right.
Where does the water flow? Well, we know where water flows. It flows downhill. It's intuitive. We know that fire spread can be predicted. And it's really about getting the right, you can't maintain 1,000 miles of fire break. It's like a capital asset, right? You put it in once, you're not done. You have to keep maintaining it. Yeah. So whereas if you could know to prioritize fuel treatments within half to a quarter mile that were primary places of approach based on the topography, and honestly, we don't have conflagrations on calm days. We have conflagrations on windy days.
Yes.
Sustained windy days. Most of those conditions come from frontal passages that are going to drive air across dry landscape. So there's ways you can look at the historical data on weather patterns that also help you understand what are your most critical fire pathway approaches, and that buys you time.
Yes, love that. And just kind of to recap, and I've got another question for you that I'd like to end with, and then I'll let you share anything that you'd like to share with our audience. But, when we think about, like you had said, if we could use IBHS's approach for a wildfire prepared home in a community, that's step one. But one thing that you mentioned is the sustainability in the maintenance of the things that were done initially to get that certification, because I can see people doing the work, and this is going to come in years to come, where it's identified as something that actually works, fantastic, and then there has to be this ongoing maintenance and ongoing inspections to make sure the community is still adopting those things and not going back to our old ways. So I think I see that as phase 2 in the future, but I would be so excited to engage with a community that's actively willing to do something like that. So I'm going to put that challenge out there. We have some listeners with that manage HOA communities, and I would love to see, even as small as the community would be, I would love to see that happen, and we would love to be a part of helping to make those communities more fire resistant. But the question I had for you here, Frank, that it might tie into legislation, and I know you're tied into working with the state and working with insurance companies. And I feel like, after talking to Janet Ruiz last week from the
Triple I.
Insurance Information Institute, right? She started to talk about Prop 103 and about how the insurance companies or they're not allowed to use future data. They're only allowed to use past data. I don't understand why that is, and maybe you could elaborate on that, but would you agree that future data really has to come into the play?
Yeah.
Why are you smiling? What's happening? Is this
yeah, no, it's almost like a plant question. No, I just recently did been involved in testimony at the Senate Insurance Senate Insurance Committee. Just got back from Sacramento yesterday for a joint session of the Assembly Insurance Committee and Assembly Emergency Management Committee, specifically about allowing modifications to Prop 103 that would support use of catastrophe models. And my statement there was yes and. Yes, we need to start bringing these kind of modeling capabilities to bear. And yet I let them know, just like I let you and your listeners know today, there are things that catastrophe models can't yet do that we need. And so to just say, yes, catastrophe models and it's some silver bullet, we're not there yet. And the fact is, we need to have some of that be very transparent so that communities and individuals can understand and see, here's my community, and here's my community on fire, right?
Yeah.
What does it look like? And now what does it look like if you can start to show optimized disruptions in those three spaces? Well, now then that helps us tell the story. If that's all on the other side of a proprietary catastrophe model, we lose the education component. So the idea is catastrophe models, yes, and they have to integrate a transparent part of this that we're going to use for education, prioritized grant funding, and honestly, emergency operations. So we can do that side better.
Well, I'm glad to hear, Frank, that you're part of your voice is being heard, and that you're able to contribute to help, at least on the legislation side, have these conversations. I know that things don't happen overnight, but I'm so glad to hear that things are actually happening. Because one of my biggest fears is with the limitations of insurance, homeowners are having to get insurance from somewhere. And so when they're getting insurance, one of my biggest fears, and I've been talking about this with a few other professionals, is when a claim, when they have to file a claim, specifically a wildfire claim, in the years to come, and I hope it's not anytime soon for anyone, but when a claim happens, and if there's a significant amount of properties that were impacted, that's when the homeowner is going to look at their policy. That's when the homeowner is going to say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Agent, I had fire damage, and then they're going to get a copy of the policy and say, holy smokes, I don't have the coverage that I thought that I had, and they're going to become irate because they bought what they needed to buy, right, for their mortgage, and maybe they weren't educated enough, and now they're going to be up in arms in the masses because they've been having to purchase different types of insurance that maybe don't have, it's not what they're used to when they're dealing with, a typical insurance company. So that's one of my biggest fears, is that something worse is going to be happening where people are really going to rise up and just say, we are done with this. There has to be something that needs to be taking place. But I love the fact that things are actually happening now. So when that time comes, there is some quick action that could be taken, Any thoughts on that?
Yes. It's not going to be very encouraging. This is a big ship with a small rudder, and you can chase through the potential cascading set of financial failures here. Just walk through it for a minute. Let's say that we really do have a continuation of withdrawal of insurers and reinsurers from the market. Those things are happening. We have throughout the West, I think, 44 million some odd properties in high fire risk areas. Most of those have mortgages. What does the banking industry do if the ability of risk transfer tools like insurance to protect, we say property owners, and we instantly go to the people that are living there. And I get that. But if you're holding a mortgage, the actual ownership of the property under those conditions rests with the mortgage industry. And if they understand now that they have had all these notes written with a complete undervaluation of risk, how do they respond? Here's another one. what might happen to municipal general obligation bonds if the people issuing those understood with better clarity what the current risk to the primary way you service the debt on those bonds, which is property tax. Now, those scenarios don't require us to have one additional fire. We could have 3 no fire seasons. But those industries go on the long game of risk. And if they understand that we now have this undervalued risk across these investments, there could be much bigger things on the horizon if we don't get this fixed. And that's a pretty significant cascading set of failures. It's very unnerving. It's one of the things that I had 2 retirements from working a long time when I took the position here with Cal Poly. And I was so grateful to come because it's a way to contribute to something that I just never felt good about, right? You go to these communities and they've just been, turned to cinder. And it just feels like you're walking into abject failure, and you do the best you can, but it's a bad feeling. And so a little older now, carrying a hose pack isn't such a good idea. I'm getting wider than I am tall. And so this is a way to contribute, in my later years. And this is significant stuff. We've got to get this fixed. And I really appreciate what you're doing with the podcast, because as I was
Thank you.
reviewing you're getting education out there. It's not one dimension, and you're hitting it from a lot of sides, and it's helping tell the story. So again, I appreciate you having me on today, and appreciate the scope of people that you're bringing into this discussion, because we need all of them, and we need them quickly.
Yeah, and Nancy Watkins is on my list, so she's going to be coming up next. Yes,
she's great. You get a good night's sleep and be ready, because I couldn't spell actuary before I met her, and now she's one of my most trusted sources. And I wrote a forward on one of her articles. I just said, her interaction with me has made me a better fire chief.
Boom. I love that.
Yeah.
And you know what? What a great statement. What a great statement. Because as a fire chief, or as an accomplished individual in any one of our careers, other people feel and see, okay, this gentleman has reached the apex. But the reality is, when you surround yourself around more people that think differently, that have other levels of skill set and expertise, holy moly. And then the culmination, right? Because people want to hear what you have to share, because then it just enlightens them even more. So I love the collaboration that's taking place, and it's very encouraging to really understand there's so many different angles that people are taking here, and they're contributing, and all of it is for us to be able to help individuals, neighborhoods, communities. And what a great point you made, Frank, about the lenders. I've never really allowed that thought process to even come in, but it's so true from an economic standpoint. That can be devastating because of the limitations that are being sold right now with some of these policies. And I could imagine what could happen. So let's hope that all the work that's being done now catches up, so we can prevent some of those catastrophic thought process. That's right. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. So, Frank, well, listen, thank you very much. Is there anything that you would like to end with and share with our listeners?
I would just say it's a good investment of time to, if you haven't caught the other podcast sessions for all things wildfire, I would do it. I mean, we're all busy. I'm busy. But once I heard one or two, I thought, I'm going to stay tuned here, because you're having the right conversations. It's good stuff.
Fantastic. Frank, well, thank you so much, and thank you for being a guest, and thank you for the stimulating thought process and conversations. And for you listeners, look up Frank, look up the things that he's doing with the WUI and with the WUI Institute, and allow this collaboration to take place. We don't always have to meet face-to-face or even conversations, but through our websites and the things that we're doing, you can see how we can all collaborate. And feel free to reach out to Frank. I can tell, and you can tell, he's a wealth of knowledge, and he's in this inner circle that is powerful enough to really make a difference. So, Frank, thank you so very much, my friend, and look forward to talking to you soon.
All right, take care.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
That's all for this episode of All Things Wildfire. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to our show and follow us on social media to stay up to date on all things wildfire. And as always, thanks for listening.